We're ready to refinish our floors now, but before we even start sanding, we recommend testing for your existing finish. We know that we have a wax finish, but if you're not entirely sure, you can perform a simple water test that involves a few droplets of water on your stairs that you let it sit for a few hours. And if it turns white, it means you have wax. And this is good to know because wax does have a tendency to gum up sandpaper, so you can always come through with a carbide scraper using the rough edges to remove the top layer. It'll make the process much faster and easier for you. Once you do that, we move on to the actual sanding. We use a belt sander for the entire stair, but you will notice that it doesn't hit every area. So you'll have to come through by hand using a sanding block and also your carbide scraper to reach those areas. But the ultimate goal of all of this is to evenly sand your stairs with each grit sequence that will then produce a nice smooth finish that will accept the stain evenly. So here's where the paint scraper comes in handy. We have some paint buildup on the inside edge of our stairs, and our carbide scraper can't reach it unless we scrape against the grain of the wood, which isn't recommended. So for comparison purposes, here's an original untouched floor with the wax finish. The stair above, we came through the carbide scraper and removed the top layer of wax. It might look a little rough to you, but don't worry because the sanding belt's going to take care of it. So here we've completed our first pass with the sanding belt using 36 grit paper. As you can see, there's some areas here that we weren't able to reach. So in order to get them, we will use a sanding block with a 36 grit sanding paper, and we just like to cut up one of the sanding belts, which makes it much easier and we know it'll be consistent. So just use heavy pressure and start sanding. In addition to using the sanding pad, we like to use small bits of sandpaper and also the carbide scraper to get as close to the edge as possible. We've completed sanding, and as you can see, there are a few dark areas remaining along the edge. Because we're using a dark stain, it's not a big problem, but if we were going lighter, we would continue the sanding process. Also, as a final check, we like to feel the edges for any possible ridge marks left by the belt sander. Sometimes you might accidentally press too hard and create a ridge, in which you might have to go back over and continue sanding with your sanding pad. So our wood stairs have a nice rounded cap finishing piece here, but the wood does run perpendicular to the overall stair graining that runs this way. As mentioned, you always want to sand in the direction of the wood grain, but as you sand in the direction of the wood grain here, you will be overlapping this perpendicular piece of wood. But that's okay because in the end, after you finish your entire grit sequence on your larger stair area, you will come on the opposite side and repeat the sanding sequence over here independently, and that will get rid of any type of deep ridges that you had created when sanding from this side. You might realize that there's a little tricky area here at this mitered corner, but it's alright because we found a really simple solution that has worked for us, which is just taking a really thin piece of cardboard, say from like a cereal box, cutting it into a small piece, and putting it along the edge of the corner. Hold in place and sand by hand, nice and slowly up until the edge. You'll notice the cardboard might fray a little bit, but that's okay, just keep replacing it, because as long as it doesn't break through, you won't have to worry about the sandpaper hitting the other piece of wood that runs perpendicular to it. In between the 1680 passes, we like to perform wood repair. As you can see here, we have a damaged corner from carpeting that existed prior. And after removing all the staples, it took pieces of wood with it. Apply the wood putty using your putty knife and apply it to your damaged area. it is okay to have excess on it because you will sand it down. You're almost there. Vacuum the stairs and finish by wiping them down with a dry microfiber cloth. We're done with our 36 grit pass, and it's time to move on to the medium, which is 60. But before we do, we'd like to review a few tips with you, which we found really helpful along the way. First, we like to vacuum as we're sanding because sandpaper is a lot more effective on a clean surface. We also like to do a final pass of sanding using the sanding block because sometimes a belt sander can catch and leave marks and you don't notice them until you start staining, and at that point, like, who seriously wants to do this again? And then lastly, in between the passes, we like to create some guide marks with a pencil that will help us indicate which areas we have sanded and haven't sanded. And this is really an incredibly effective tool. So I think it's time to keep going, and I hope you're having a successful time so far.